Today we're going to be talking about gender and sexuality. So some of the topics we're going to cover are the biological, social, and cognitive influences on gender, gender stereotypes, the similarities and differences between genders and classification of genders, gender development through the lifespan, exploring sexuality, and sexuality through the lifespan. So first, biological, social, and cognitive influences on gender. You need to understand a few basic terms. So first of all, when we're talking about gender, we're referring to characteristics of people as males and females. There's gender identity, which is a person's sense of their own gender, including their knowledge, understanding, and acceptance of being male or female. There's also gender roles. Gender roles are sets of expectations that prescribe how males or females should think, act, and feel. So you might think about, for example, traditional gender roles. In traditional gender roles, it might be that the man goes to work and women stay home with the kids, but gender roles in recent years have become much more fluid. And then there's gender typing. This is how we acquire traditional masculine or feminine roles. So if you've ever been in a toy aisle, you can really see this where the girls' aisles might be all pink and it's full of dolls and toy kitchens and things like that. And then there are aisles that are quote unquote for boys, and there's cars and trucks and action figures, not dolls, action figures, and it might even be blue. So, and even when people are expecting, if they find out if it's a boy or a girl, we're already assigning colors to either boys or girls. So gender typing, that acquisition process, really starts early and is pretty pervasive. Some biological influences on gender. Gender is the most influenced by two classes of hormones. These are estrogens and androgens. At the beginning, male and female embryos actually look very much alike, and they diverge as the result of hormonal secretions. So in males, there's a gene on the Y chromosome, and that creates a cascade of changes that directs the formation of testes, which secrete testosterone. If that Y chromosome doesn't, that particular gene on that Y chromosome doesn't activate, or something else happens, that process might not happen. So estrogens are the sex hormones that influence female physical sex characteristics and that help to regulate the menstrual cycle. Androgens are sex hormones that promote the development of male genitals and secondary sex characteristics. So when you think about, like beards and things like that, those are secondary sex characteristics. In men, the most important androgen is testosterone. So these levels of hormones, brought about often by whether or not there's a Y chromosome present, tend to create differences physically between males and females. But it always doesn't work out as clean cut that way. Sometimes you'll have what is called intersex, where these hormone levels haven't gone very much one way or the other. You have basically a mix of the two. There are also social influences on gender. Remember, gender is about your identity and your roles and how you feel. So one influence on gender is explained by social role theory. So social role theory says that psychological gender differences result from contrasting roles of men and women. Cultural differences in social hierarchies and division of labor have led people to adapt by adopting certain traits. So historical power imbalances between men and women over the course of just human existence have led to these changes in the way that people adopt roles and expectations among themselves. Then there's also social cognitive theory. This proposes that children's gender development occurs through observation, imitation, and either reward or punishment. So this is influenced greatly by how peers, media react to children, how parents react to them, schools and teachers, how people treat boys and girls, whether they treat them equally, or if there are subtle differences in the way that they treat them or have expectations of them. You might see, for example, someone, we tend to be a little bit more accepting, a lot more accepting of girls playing with what we consider to be male toys than boys playing with what we consider to be female toys. So you might have, if you have a parent that freaks out that their son is playing with dolls, then that child is going to learn, oh, this is not appropriate. I shouldn't do this. There's something wrong with me liking dolls because I'm a boy or something like that. So this brings us to cognitive influences. According to social cognitive theory, observation, and you'll see that this is very similar to what we just talked about. Observation, imitation, rewards, and punishments are the mechanisms of gender development. So it's just the process of how this actually happens. And what's going on there is through that process, children are developing gender schemas. Gender schema theory says that gender typing emerges as children gradually develop gender schemas of what is gender appropriate and gender inappropriate behavior in their culture. So these gender schemas organize the world in terms of male and female. What does it mean to be male? What does it mean to be female? And then as a function of how we identify ourselves, so if this is what it means to be female, and I know myself and feel myself to be a female, then this is how I should act. So that's the process by which this works. And children are motivated in a lot of different ways to act in ways that conform to these gender schemas. Now let's talk about stereotypes, similarities and differences, and classification. Gender stereotypes are just our general impressions and beliefs about males and females. So these are just these ideas that we get into our head that all females are one way, all males are a particular way. You might have, for example, a situation where maybe there's a baby and someone doesn't know what to do with it, and they hand it to the nearest woman, and she's like, well, what am I supposed to do? Why are you handing the baby to me? And they're like, well, you're a woman, don't you have, aren't you nurturing or whatever? Not necessarily, okay? There's nothing that automatically means that a woman is going to be better than a man with a baby. Also, males, if there's a spider, he's like, oh, go kill it. Well, I don't know. The guy might not like spiders. Not everyone is just, we make assumptions. We very often make just assumptions about people based on whether or not they're male or female, and these are based in gender stereotypes. Now, it doesn't mean that it's not true for some people, but it's certainly not the case that all women are a certain way and all men are a certain way. So we're going to talk about some similarities and differences, but before I go into some of these similarities and differences, I want to point out that when we talk about these differences, this is not like all men are this way or all women are this other way. These can be very, very slight differences. So if we talk about, for example, males having better visuospatial skills than females, if you look at charts like this, you can see on the average, yes, there's a difference, but it's not like we're talking about huge differences. So all the things that we're going to be talking about, there are slight differences, and in many ways, men and women are more similar than different. So these gender differences are averages. They do not apply to all females or all males, so it doesn't mean that all of one gender are better or worse at something than another gender. Even when gender differences occur, there's often a considerable overlap between males and females. And these differences may be due primarily to biological factors, sociocultural factors, or both. So some physical differences. First of all, women have more body fat than men. Men, on average, are about 10% taller than females. Women tend to have a longer life expectancy and are less likely to develop disorders, more resistant to infection, and have more elastic blood vessels. Men have higher levels of stress hormones, which causes faster clotting and higher blood pressure, which is one of the reasons why men are at greater risk for a heart attack. There are areas of the parietal lobe that functions in visuospatial skills, and those tend to be larger in men. There are areas of the brain involved in emotional expression, and those tend to show more metabolic activity in women. Some cognitive differences and similarities. In general, no differences have been found in overall intellectual ability, but we do see some differences appear in cognitive areas, although these differences may have been exaggerated. So, as I've mentioned, boys have better visuospatial skills than girls. We do not actually see differences in math scores. When you account for other factors that might affect an individual, you actually don't see differences in math scores. We can get into that a little bit later. Girls have more negative math attitudes, and adults' expectations tend to be biased in favor of boys. So when you take into account these attitudes and expectations, that's when you see differences or no difference. Girls score higher than boys in reading and writing. Girls are in better grades overall and complete high school at a higher rate. But of course, these things may reflect non-cognitive factors, so social issues and whatnot. Speaking of social issues, again, these are all on average. This is not to say all men or all women. Boys on average are more physically aggressive than girls are. Girls, by contrast, are more likely to use verbal or relational aggression. Boys, on average, show less self-regulation than girls. And gender differences, though, in children's emotional expression is very small. So in general, when kids are kids, there's very little differences between boys and girls in how they express emotion, the degree to which they engage in self-disclosure, and how self-assertive they are. These things tend to develop later on. And then there's classification of gender. Historically, we've tended to gravitate towards a dichotomy of masculine and feminine, but there's more than just girly girls and macho men. There's ways to identify beyond that. So more and more we have this idea of androgyny, the presence of positive masculine and feminine characteristics in the same person. Okay, so a man can be strong and brave and also nurturing. A woman can be nurturing and kind and also assertive. Okay, so it's not like you have to be all one way or another. People can have both masculine and feminine characteristics, and this is a positive thing. When we say transgender, we're referring to individuals who adopt a gender identity that differs from the one assigned at birth. Some argue that trans is a better umbrella term for a variety of gender identities and expressions. And if you've heard the word cisgender, that refers to someone for whom their gender identity and expression matches the gender identity that they were assigned at birth. So you were assigned male at birth, and you feel like a male, and you identify and express yourself as a male. So that would be cisgender. We are starting to go beyond gender as a binary construct. The long existing concept of gender as having two categories, either male or female, is starting to be challenged. Neuroscience research has indicated that we have more of a gender mosaic rather than his and hers brains that are very different. It's not like girl brains are exactly this way and boy brains are exactly that way. We all have this tapestry of our minds. Endocrinology research, so hormones, reveals more hormonal similarities in males and females than was previously envisioned. Recent conceptual changes go far beyond characterizing individuals as masculine or feminine, including new categories as transgender, cisgender, etc. Developmental research indicates that culture is strongly influences the tendency to view gender as binary. If you take that away and just let people be, we find that gender categories are much more fluid. So let's talk about how gender develops through the lifespan. In childhood, the amount, timing, and intensity of gender socialization varies for boys and girls. boys tend to receive earlier and more intense gender socialization. So they're more likely to hear more often, earlier often, oh, boys don't do that, or, be strong, be brave, don't cry, that sort of thing. And the social cost for deviating from these norms is higher for boys. So if a girl is playing with a truck, no one really cares. But if a boy starts playing with a Barbie doll, people lose their minds. Flexibility in gender roles applies more for girls, as I just mentioned. Boys also might have a more difficult time learning their masculine gender role because male models are less accessible and the messages are not always consistent. Adolescence is when gender roles really start to spike. So there's something called the gender intensification hypothesis. This says that psychological and behavioral differences increase in early adolescence. So you see an increased pressure to conform to traditional masculine and feminine gender roles. Adopting a strong masculine role in adolescence is associated with problem behaviors. So just that this sense of, I have to be, like whatever I feel like masculine, what it means to be a man. If you're hyper, hyper obsessed with proving that you're, a manly man, this tends to be associated with problem behaviors. And for both boys and girls, extreme gender-type behaviors are linked to low school engagement and attachment. If you've ever seen the movie Mean Girls, she keeps considering joining the mathletes, and everyone keeps saying, you can't join mathletes, it's social suicide. Because it's no matter who you are, you just can't win with that situation. For girls, it goes against the gender stereotype that women aren't supposed to be good at math. For men, math, it's not like a macho, it's not like football or whatever. So we get really hyper obsessed with silly things like that when we're in adolescence. And so it's just this idea that in adolescence, those psychological and behavioral differences really begin to increase. Things start to calm down eventually in adulthood and as we age. So some of the things you might see are differences in communication styles. Again, all these things are on average. It's not for any particular given person. But one of the things we might see, for example, is a difference in rapport talk versus report talk. So some people prefer to engage in rapport talk. So this is conversation. The purpose of talking to someone is to establish connections and negotiate relationships. It's the call someone up and talk just because you wanted to talk, or let's have lunch and just how are you doing and all that sort of thing. Whereas report talk is designed to give information. So this is just... You'll see differences on an individual level with this, and again, it's not. Women tend to engage in more rapport talk, whereas men tend to engage in more report talk. But it's not. Again, it's not like all men and all women do this. I'll just give an example. My brother-in-law loves to engage in rapport talk, and he will message me. Through Facebook Messenger and things like that, and he just wants to chat, and I really don't. I'm a report talk person. You might say, oh, let's get together for a cup of coffee, and I'm like, hey, let's not. I'm unfortunately one of those people that you'll send me a paragraph in a text, and I'll respond with, okay. If you didn't have a question, okay, that message received, information received. I don't know what else you want from me. So people have those individual differences in that. So men tend to engage in more report talk. Women tend to engage in more rapport talk. But again, research has yielded mixed results in how extensive these differences may be, and you can definitely see individual differences there. But I'm kind of laughing because you probably recognize this in yourself and someone else if you've ever kind of had some tension between you guys because of this. That might be why. All right, now let's explore sexuality. First of all, some biological and cultural factors that affect our sexuality. A big one, obviously, is sex hormones. So sex hormones, these do have an effect, but those effects are difficult to distinguish because human sexual behavior is so individualized. There are also cultural issues. So between the culture you grew up in, the family you grew up in, any religious influences that you may have, these can influence your sexual script. Your sexual script is stereotyped patterns of expectations for how people should behave sexually. Now, the traditional religious script is that sex is acceptable only within marriage. Extramarital sex is taboo, especially for women. And sex means reproduction and sometimes affection. And there's nothing wrong with that, okay? There's also the romantic script. This is the idea that sex is synonymous with love. It's just a way that you show love. If you are in love with someone or have a lot of affection for them, then sexual activity is acceptable with them. And so again, nothing wrong with that either. And so people just have their own sexual scripts that have been influenced by their culture, their religion, and their own personal individual differences. Among men and women, some sexual scripts do involve a double standard. So people might have one idea in their head for what's appropriate for men and what's appropriate for women, and those might not be the same thing. Then there's sexual orientation. Sexual orientation has to do with who you are attracted to. Okay, so, and sexuality plays a very strong role in well-being. It is strongly linked to life satisfaction for both men and women. Regardless of sexual orientation, people have similar physiological responses during sexual arousal and seem to be aroused by the same types of tactile stimulation. Sexual orientation is likely to be determined by a combination of genetic, hormonal, cognitive, and environmental factors. Most experts believe that no one factor alone causes sexual orientation. It's not a simple thing, and the weight of each factor can vary from one individual to the next. But it's important to stress that no matter the orientation, an individual cannot be talked out of it. It's not like someone sits down one day and says, what do I want my sexual orientation to be? It doesn't work like that, okay? Now, people may be confused for a while about how they feel, especially if it doesn't fall within society's more dichotomous ideas of sexual identity, orientation, and so forth. But it's not like it's something you choose. So to wrap up gender and sexuality, before we move on to some other things, I found this and I thought that this was a cute way of showing it. This is the genderbread person. So you have the ideas of gender identity, gender expression, biological sex, and sexual orientation. So we'll just talk about the differences between these. So first you've got gender identity. So remember that gender identity is how you in your head think about yourself. Okay, it's just your sense of being a man or a woman or somewhere in between. Maybe you don't identify either way. There's also gender expression. This is how you demonstrate your gender through the ways that you act, dress, behave, and interact with others. Some people express themselves in a very feminine way. Some express themselves in a very masculine way. Others are more androgynous. There's biological sex. So this has to do with your hormones and your chromosomes. So if you have, two X chromosomes, you're female. Excuse me. If you have an X and a Y chromosome, you tend to be male. But again, there's sometimes this combination of the two where it doesn't necessarily go as clear-cut as that, and you might have intersex. And then there's sexual orientation. So this is who you are physically, spiritually, and emotionally attracted to based on their sex or gender in relation to your own. So someone who is heterosexual is attracted to someone who is of the opposite gender or sex. Someone who is homosexual is attracted to someone who is of the same gender or sex. And then you've got bisexual, who is attracted to either way. And we can also get into things like pansexual and asexual, but that might exceed the scope of this lecture. I am going to be posting another YouTube video on that though. Okay, completely switching gears. If we're talking about sexuality, something that is problematic is forcible sexual behavior and sexual harassment. So forcible sexual behavior, rape. Rape is forcible sexual intercourse with a person who does not give consent. The actual number of cases isn't easy to determine because a lot of people are reluctant to report incidents due to a number of factors, including the fact that very few of these incidents are actually end up being prosecuted. We do know that nearly 200,000 rapes are reported each year, so the actual number is probably much, much higher. Most of the victims are women, but rape of men does occur. When talking about male rapists, they tend to share the following characteristics. Aggression enhances their sense of power or masculinity, so rape isn't about sex; it's about control. So engaging in that aggression tends to enhance that sense of power. They tend to be more angry at women in general, and they have the goal of wanting to hurt or humiliate their victims. The most common type of rape is date or acquaintance rape. So most rape is not some person in a dark alley that jumped out at you. Most of the time, it's someone that you knew. So this tends to be coercive sexual activity directed at someone with whom the victim is at least casually acquainted. So you want to be really, really careful. And very pervasive is sexual harassment. This is a manifestation of power by one person over another. So it's unwelcome sexual advancements, remarks, and so forth. It can take many different forms from, again, these inappropriate sexual remarks to unwanted physical contact, blatant propositions, all the way up to straight up sexual assault. Millions of women experience sexual harassment each year in workplace and educational settings. And sexual harassment of men by women also occurs, but it's to a far lesser extent. And of course, both sexual assault and sexual harassment can result in severe and long-lasting psychological consequences for the victims. You're probably familiar with the Me Too movement. This has helped to show the prevalence of sexual assault and harassment of women. All right, let's talk about how sexuality develops through the lifespan. In childhood and adolescence, there's not a whole lot going on in childhood. I mean, children are very likely to engage in curiosity about their bodies and ask questions about reproduction. So, they might play around with themselves and things like that. So if you have like a 3-year-old who just won't keep their hand out of their pants, don't freak out. That's extremely normal. Adolescence is a time of more overt and intentional sexual exploration and experimentation. In the US, children and adolescents learn a great deal about sex from the media, which can be problematic because that's not very often a realistic representation of how sex and relationships really work. Something that is of increasing concern is sexting, which is when people send each other inappropriate messages or images via social media or with their phones, and so that can be a big problem. People think, oh, I'm just sending it to this one person, but once it's out there, and you have no control over where that ends up. Adolescent sexual identity is influenced by social norms related to sex. So the way that the adolescents tend to identify themselves sexually and decide what is appropriate or inappropriate is very much influenced by how they perceive their peers, whether they think that their peers are having sex, whether they think their peers are using protection. So it's very important to be aware of who your adolescents are dealing with and what kind of role models they have. So some concerns in adolescence, because adolescence is when a lot of people are starting to engage in sexual behavior. A lot of people by the end of high school have engaged in sexual behavior. One is that many adolescents are not emotionally prepared to handle sexual experiences. Early sexual activity is linked with risky behaviors such as drug use, delinquency, and school-related problems. Also, too many sexually active adolescents do not use contraceptives, or they use them inconsistently. It's not uncommon for adolescents to only receive abstinence-only education about sex ed, and so all they know about sex is don't do it. And so if they do it anyway, they don't know very much about how to protect themselves in the process. One study found that 50% of U.S. 15 to 19-year-old girls with unintended pregnancies that ended in live births were not using birth control when they got pregnant. And nearly half of the 20 million new sexually transmitted infections in the U.S. occur in 15 to 24-year-olds. And finally, adolescent pregnancy creates health problems and developmental outcome risks for both the baby and the mother, such as low birth weight and depression. So it's something that it merits looking into and being alert about. Then moving into emerging adulthood. So we're talking about like 18 to 25 here. At the beginning of emerging adulthood, so basically by the end of, by around 18, over 60% of individuals have experienced, I think this is in the US, have experienced sexual intercourse. By the end of emerging adulthood, so by about 25, the majority have done so. So most have. At the same time, the average age of marriage in the US is currently 29.5 for males and 27.5 for females, meaning that most emerging adults are both sexually active and unmarried. You're seeing an increase in casual sex, including hookups and other sexual risk factors. So those are becoming more common. You'll see also things such as the designation friends with benefits, and that is also on the increase. Some changes in sexuality as we age. For women, as we age, our fertility starts to decline, and that declines in men and women both, but it's more pronounced for women. Men don't lose the ability necessarily to have children, whereas this definitely becomes an issue for women. So climacteric is just that midlife transition where fertility declines. Women eventually experience menopause. So this is when a woman's menstrual period ceases. This is usually during the late 40s or 50s. And the official, like when you can officially say you've hit menopause is when you've gone 1 full year without a menstrual period. Now, it's not like everything is running smoothly and then just slams to a stop all of a sudden. There is a period called perimenopause. So this is a transitional period from normal menstrual periods to none. And this can be up to 10 years. So it's like a car sputtering to a stop. Sorry for that. But it's, again, just this transitional period. Now, once people hit menopause or maybe the late stages of perimenopause, you will experience symptoms such as hot flashes and whatnot. There are things that you can do to help alleviate or reduce some of these symptoms. So one is hormone replacement therapy. That's a very common one, although some people want to avoid that because long-term use of hormone replacement therapy has been linked with an increased risk of cancer. So some alternatives to hormone replacement therapy is really taking care of yourself. Okay, so engaging in regular exercise, mindfulness training, taking dietary supplements to make sure that there are no gaps or imbalances in your nutrition. There are some herbal remedies out there, relaxation therapy, acupuncture. There are non-steroidal. There's a lot of things. Hypnosis, aerobics training, yoga. Okay, so all these things, basically taking care of yourself. The more you take care of your body, the easier it will be for it to deal with whatever is coming its way. And then in men, again, with climacteric, we do have a decreased fertility, but unlike women, men do not lose the capacity to have children. Testosterone production and sperm count do show a slow decline, and sexual drive can be reduced later in life. Erections are often less full and frequent. More stimulation is required to achieve them, but this can also stem from physiological factors such as smoking, diabetes, hypertension, high cholesterol, depression, lack of exercise. So again, just like with women, the more you take care of yourself, the better things will be. Men can get testosterone replacement therapy. So just like with women, there's hormone replacement therapy available. This can improve sexual functioning and has other positive health effects as well. And erectile dysfunction is common in aging men. So all you have to do is see the how well Viagra sells, and you would know that. And finally, just when it comes to middle and late adulthood, it's not like we stop being sexual beings. Sexual activity during middle and late adulthood, it might occur on a less frequent basis, but part of that is due to all the other things going on. So people are working, they've got their careers, their family issues. They might be caring for, adult children and very aging parents. Decreased energy levels, routine. These are all things that can contribute to that decline. Living with a spouse or partner seems to make a huge difference. So availability is a big part of it, so that when you have the energy and the time, that can happen. And again, health in middle age is really a key factor in sexual activity. You have the ability to continue to be happy and healthy and sexually active throughout your entire lifespan, but a big part of that is going to be how well you take care of yourself. Eat right, exercise, take care of yourself emotionally and psychologically, and you have the makings of good times forevermore. All right, I will talk to you guys next time, and I hope you have a good day.